All right, Eric Engels, you kicked off this week by sharing a portrait on Twitter of yourself that was done by your cousin and cartoonist for The New Yorker, Barry Blitz. So in keeping with that theme, Eric, please paint us a picture on what maybe your biggest question is for the Montreal Canadiens as they embark on training camp on July 13th.
Well, before I do that, I just want to point out I find it really interesting that you're taller than me in this window-to-window setup. So I'm feeling that much more normal right now in this situation. Second, just going over what Canadiens camp is looking like and what maybe the biggest question is the Carey Price factor. We heard a lot about the Carey Price factor in the NHL and the players deciding whether or not they were going to return in a 24-team format. Their concerns over a short series with a goaltender that could get hot, especially a guy like Carey Price. You know, my biggest question about that guy is he's facing shots for the first time this week in Brassard. You know, he was able to get on the ice in Washington State where he was with his family for a couple of weeks, but he wasn't able to field shots from anybody, and certainly nobody of NHL caliber. So that's a long layoff from March until now without facing the kind of work that he would need in order to prepare for games that are going to be played perhaps as early as the end of this month. So it is the ultimate question going into a shortened series and potentially playoffs as to which Carey Price we're going to get, because we've seen a different guy from month to month at different times over the last couple of years. You know, particularly in the month of November, he hasn't been too strong. He's gotten off to somewhat slow starts in October, but average starts, I would call them, you know, in terms of his numbers versus the rest of the goaltenders in the league. And then from December and January onwards, he's been one of the top 5 goalies in the world, numbers-wise, over the last couple seasons. So which guy are the Canadiens going to get headed into the play-in round with the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Well, and Carey's one of those guys that has become one of the best at keeping his cards close to his chest. So do you have any sense, Eric, on just his psyche right now or how he's viewing all of this that's by no means normal?
Yeah, I think when we spoke to him a little over a week ago or a little under a week ago, he had, you know, expressed his concerns about what the level of information that he had was. You know, he didn't have enough information to make an informed decision on whether or not he wanted to return to play. But I think the fact that he traveled shortly after to Montreal and that information became available would suggest that he's interested in playing and is ready to move forward. And the fact he's on the ice practicing is probably a good sign for himself and the Canadiens in terms of his inclusion in this tournament. And, you know, I don't think you can belittle anybody who's expressing concerns at this point about this whole plan. But I am amazed that the NHL and the players were able to pull this off the way they have, the amount of detail and work that went into this agreement, the protocols in place to make sure that everybody's safe. It seems like a really good plan. Obviously, nothing that they can put together is risk-free. But at least it's one that the players can feel a lot more comfortable now than they did maybe even a week ago.
You mentioned the return to play agreement. One of the clauses that's in there, Eric, that states that any players that are determined to be at a substantial risk of developing a serious illness as a result of exposure to the novel coronavirus shall be deemed unfit to play and shall not be permitted to participate in either phase 3 or phase 4. And for a lot of people, when they saw that, the name that came to mind was Max Domi because he is a type 1 diabetic. Any sort of sense on how that will affect him and I guess his health here as we move forward?
You know, the only thing I'll say about that, Kyle, is we're going to find out real soon what that situation is. You know, as soon as Max arrives in Montreal, as soon as he submits to his pre-medical exam prior to stepping on the ice for training camp, a decision's got to get made in his regard. And I'm curious as anybody else is to see. I can totally understand if doctors would deem that it's too risky for a player like Max to be involved at this stage and where we're at with the coronavirus and all the potential ways we have of dealing with the situation and isolating players and making sure they're safe. If he's too far at risk, they won't let him play. All that said, you know, you look at the situation with people that are diabetic and COVID, and certainly, you know, it's proven that there could be further complications for those types of people. Other research suggests that people that manage their diabetes particularly well would not be at any more risk than anybody else. And if you were to look at the poster boy for someone who manages his diabetes well, Max Domi would probably be that guy. You know, I've had in-depth discussions with him. He wrote a book about how he manages his diabetes on a daily basis. He is so on top of everything he eats, to his sleeping patterns, to everything he needs to do in order to be a professional athlete. And it is it's a rigorous regimen that he subscribes to. So I just believe, without knowing one way or another, I do believe that he's going to be okay, and I believe the doctors will likely deem that. But they have the opportunity to pull him from the action. So we, just like you, I'm eager to see what's going to happen there.
The fact that his condo in Montreal doubles as a wellness center, I suppose, bodes well, or paints a pretty clear picture about just how serious he is about keeping his body right at all times. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Eric, we thought his season was over with that spleen injury. Then the pandemic hit. Everything got pushed back. He's deemed healthy again. Does he have a shot at playing this summer?
Well, the decision's going to fall to Claude Julien, and I can't wait to see how he makes it. And more than anything, because I think we're going to be attending these practices for training camp, I can't wait to see what Kotkaniemi looks like. When we last saw him, he had 13 points in 12 games in the AHL after a real struggle of a season with Montreal. He was able to reshape his confidence. We saw some pictures of him emerge, throughout the pandemic that it looked as though he's taken on weight and gotten into better physical condition than when we last saw him. He just turned 20 this week. He's a big body, a guy with a ton of talent. A lot of the scouts believe, regardless of how this season went for him, that he's going to pan out at his top end to be a top 2 center in this league, and that process could start as early as just a few weeks from now. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of footprint he leaves in Canadiens camp here, and what the impression is that he leaves on Claude Julien and the coaching staff. Because one thing is, if he proves that he can play, that's then they're going to be forced into a decision of whether or not to play him, because they've got a number of players at their disposal, and there's limited spots at center. If you count Domi playing, and Nick Suzuki and Jake Evans and Philip Deneau, that's 4 centers right there. So will he have to play on the wing? It's all going to be in his hands. Marc Bergevin always likes to say the players make the decisions for us. Jesperi Kotkaniemi has the ability to come in, just like he did a couple years ago at training camp after being drafted, and make a decision for the Montreal Canadiens. Because let's face it, Kyle, the most important thing that the Canadiens are getting out of this situation is a chance to develop their young talent. And their young talent has to prove capable of being put in that situation. But it's going to be to their benefit if they get meaningful games played under their belts in this circumstances, and then they prove worthy of that opportunity.
So I guess on that note, how do you think the coaching staff and management is approaching this? Because, if things had gone on as normal, they were not going to be a playoff team. They sold at the deadline, and then if they lose out to Pittsburgh in the qualification round, they've got a 12.5% chance at ALEXIS LAFRENIERE. How do you think they'll go about dressing their lineups when things get started? Yeah,
and it sounds like a limited chance when you say 12.5%, but I would suggest that it's a better chance than they have at winning the Stanley Cup tournament of 24 teams. They're coming in as the 24th place team. Like you mentioned, they sold off assets at the deadline, and not just nobody. They sold off Ilya Kovalchuk, who was a huge boost to their lineup when he came to the Canadiens via trade. They sold off Nate Thompson, who was a key veteran, the exact type of player you want for a playoff run, which is exactly why Philadelphia decided to add him. They sold off Nick Cousins to Vegas. They've depleted themselves in a way that you need depth moving forward. Even if you have the players to potentially skate in those spots initially, you need the depth to go on a serious run. And I don't think the Canadiens are under any illusions about who they are coming into this tournament. All that said, they are believers and proponents, Claude Julien and Marc Bergevin, both of them, in the idea that if you make it, anything can happen. And they didn't make it on their own, but they were given an opportunity to make it here. So I can't wait to see how they approach it. From my end, and I just said it in my last answer here, that I think their best opportunity is to develop some of their young talent. And I think they should really lean on that young talent and give them that opportunity to gain experience. On the other hand, Claude Julien believes the best way to move forward for his team and to take another key step forward in the process is for their players to develop in a winning environment. And he's going to have to balance those two elements and come up with the right answer for who to play and for how much time. And, I think Canadiens fans who normally wouldn't be watching hockey, just like all of us in July, are going to be watching with a real vested interest in how that lineup gets set.
NHL training camps in the middle of July. It's an image that may not necessarily win you a Pulitzer, but there is some beauty in the fact that hockey is back. Eric, thanks for this, man.
My pleasure.